Scary telling.
I never believed in ghosts until the night my ex-boyfriend died. It was a car accident, and it happened so suddenly that I couldn't even say goodbye. The days that followed were a blur of tears, sadness, and regret. We had ended things on bad terms, and I had never gotten the chance to make amends. 2 nights after his death, I heard a noise outside my house. It was a familiar sound, the metallic clang of his guitar-shaped beer opener. I froze in fear, wondering if it was just my imagination or if something else was happening. But then my dog started barking, confirming that I wasn't the only one who had heard it. I went outside, heart pounding, but there was no one there. I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence. Maybe someone else had the same beer opener, and it was just my grief playing tricks on me. But then it happened again. And again. Every few nights, I would hear that same metallic clang outside my window. Sometimes it was accompanied by the sound of footsteps or the faint echo of his laughter. At first, I was terrified. I had never been a believer in the supernatural, and the thought of my ex-boyfriend's ghost haunting me was too much to bear. But as time went on, I began to feel comforted by the sounds. It was as if he was keeping his promise to haunt me for fun, to remind me that he was still around in some way. I tried to tell myself that it was all in my head, that there had to be a logical explanation for the noises. But I couldn't deny the feeling of someone watching me, the unexplainable cold spots in my house, or the strange dreams I started having. In one dream, my ex was standing in front of me, smiling, but his eyes were empty and hollow. In another, he was whispering my name over and over again until I woke up in a cold sweat. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. I became obsessed with finding out the truth about what was happening to me. I read every book on the supernatural that I could find, and I even went to see a psychic. She told me that my ex was indeed trying to communicate with me, and that he had a message for me. The message was simple: he forgave me. He knew that I had never intended to hurt him, and he wanted me to move on with my life. The psychic also warned me that the more I acknowledged the sounds and the dreams, the stronger the connection between me and my ex would become. I was torn between wanting to believe that my ex was still with me in some way and wanting to move on from the past. But the sounds and the dreams continued, and I couldn't escape the feeling that he was still watching over me. Then, one day, it all stopped. The noises, the dreams, the cold spots, everything disappeared. It was as if my ex had finally found peace and had moved on to the afterlife. I was left with a strange mix of emotions: relief that the haunting was over, and sadness that I would never hear the familiar sound of his beer opener again. Years have passed since then, and I still think about my ex from time to time. I've moved on with my life, but the experience of his haunting has stayed with me. I'm still not sure what to make of it. Was it all in my head, or was it something truly supernatural? All I know is that it was one of the scariest experiences of my life, and it made me a believer in the possibility of the afterlife. Looking back, I realized that my ex was always a bit of a prankster. He loved to make me laugh and play practical jokes on me. Even in death, he found a way to keep me on my toes. And while it was scary at times, I'm grateful for the experience. It reminded me that life is fleeting and that we should cherish the people we love while we can. In the end, I like to think that my ex found peace and moved on to a better place. But I'll never forget the haunting promise he made to me and the strange comfort I found in his ghostly presence. I was sitting on the couch in my living room, enjoying a quiet evening at home. My husband was out of town on a business trip, so I had the house to myself. I was content with my book until I noticed something strange happening in the master bedroom. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but then I saw movement. A figure emerged from the closet and started walking across the room. I couldn't see much, but I could tell that it was a man, and he had a strange aura about him. As he approached, he stopped, looked straight at me, and put his finger to his lips as if to tell me to be quiet. Then he turned around and disappeared back into the closet. I was left feeling scared and alone. Who was that man, and why was he in my house? I tried to shake it off and tell myself that I was just imagining things, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was off. The next day, I did some research and found out that the previous tenant had shot himself in the exact spot where the mysterious small hole in the ceiling of our bedroom was located. I couldn't believe it. Was this the same man I had seen the night before? As the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I entered the master bedroom, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was as if the man was still there, haunting the room. One evening, I decided to confront my fears and investigate the closet. I opened the door slowly and peered inside, but there was nothing there. Just as I was about to close the door and leave, I heard a strange noise coming from inside the closet. It was a low, guttural moan, and it sent shivers down my spine. Suddenly, the man appeared again, this time right in front of me. I could see his face clearly now. It was covered in blood, and the back of his head was missing. I screamed and stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet and falling to the ground. When I looked up again, the man was gone. I knew then that I had to get out of the house. I grabbed my phone and ran to the front door, not daring to look back. As I stepped outside, I could feel the cool night air on my face, and I knew that I was safe. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the man was still watching me from inside the house. From that night on, I never stepped foot in the master bedroom again. Every time I passed by, I could feel the man's presence, lurking just beyond the closet door. It was as if he was waiting for me to return, so that he could finish what he had started. Eventually, my husband and I decided to move out of the house. We couldn't stand the thought of living with such a sinister presence lurking in the shadows. But even now, years later, I can still feel the man's gaze upon me, haunting me from beyond the grave. Growing up, my family and I lived in an apartment that had a dark history. A murder had been committed there before we moved in, but my parents thought nothing of it. We settled in quickly, and everything seemed normal until my big sister started insisting on keeping the bedroom window closed at night. I was always curious about why she did that, but she never told me. One night, while she was out with friends, I decided to open the window and look outside. I was met with a chilling sight. 3 faces were staring back at me, all with no hair, noses, or mouths. They just stared at me, unblinking. I screamed and shut the window immediately, and my sister scolded me when she returned, telling me to never open the window again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the faces were watching me. Every night, I would catch glimpses of them, watching me through the glass. As the months went by, I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then, one day, my sister and I were talking about the apartment, and I mentioned the faces. Her face went pale, and she told me that she had seen them too. She revealed that every night, when she thought I was asleep, she would peek outside the window and see the faces staring back at her. She said they never did anything, never moved, never spoke. They just watched her. We both tried to ignore the faces and pretend that they weren't there. But every time I closed my eyes, I would see their featureless faces staring back at me. I became paranoid and started avoiding the window altogether. One night, I woke up to find my sister's bed empty. I called out to her, but there was no answer. That's when I heard a faint whisper coming from outside the window. I crept towards it, trying to make out the words. It was a voice I had never heard before, and it was speaking in a language I couldn't understand. Suddenly, a hand reached out from the other side of the glass and grabbed me. I screamed and fell back, hitting my head on the floor. When I opened my eyes, the faces were gone, and my sister was back in bed, fast asleep. I never spoke about the incident with my sister, afraid that she wouldn't believe me. But I knew that what had happened was real. The faces had come for me that night, and I didn't know why. Years went by, and my family moved out of the apartment. But even now, as an adult, I still dream about the faces. They haunt me, watching me from the darkness, waiting for their chance to come back and take me away. I don't know what they want, but I know that they're still out there, watching, waiting. It was a little over a year ago when my beloved dog, Harley Bear, passed away. She was on the East Coast with my boyfriend while I was on a trip to the West Coast. I still remember the moment I got the call. My world shattered into a million pieces. The next morning, I drove to the airport, hysterical and bawling the whole way. I felt like I was talking to Harley, telling her how sorry I was and how much I loved her. I just couldn't believe she was gone. As I was driving, I saw a car passing by with a license plate that read, ITSHB. It took a moment for the words to register in my mind, but when they did, I felt a chill run down my spine. Those letters and numbers were like a message from the beyond, a sign from my dear Harley that she was still out there somewhere and could hear me. For months, I couldn't shake off the feeling that Harley was still with me. Every now and then, I would hear a faint bark or see a glimpse of her in the corner of my eye. I even thought I felt her fur brush against my leg while I was sitting alone in the living room. One night, I was home alone and decided to watch some TV to take my mind off things. As I was flipping through channels, I heard a scratching sound coming from the front door. I thought it was odd, as I knew for sure that no one was supposed to be coming over that night. I went to check the peephole and saw nothing. I thought I must have been hearing things, so I went back to the couch and resumed watching TV. But the scratching sound persisted, and it was getting louder and more insistent. I got up again and slowly walked to the door. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. When I reached the door, I saw that the doorknob was turning by itself, as if someone was trying to open the door from the other side. I was frozen with fear, not knowing what to do. That's when I heard it, a faint bark, like the one Harley used to make when she wanted to come in the house. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I slowly opened the door, and there she was, my dear Harley, standing on the doorstep, wagging her tail, and looking up at me with those big brown eyes. I was overcome with joy and disbelief. I reached down to pet her, and she licked my hand. I couldn't believe it. It was like a miracle had happened. I picked her up and brought her inside, and she immediately curled up on her favorite spot on the couch, as if she had never left. For the next few weeks, I spent every waking moment with Harley, taking her for walks, playing fetch, and just sitting with her, relishing every moment we had together. But then, one day, she was gone again, just like that. I woke up in the morning, and she was nowhere to be found. I searched everywhere, but there was no sign of her. It was like she had disappeared into thin air. I was devastated, but I knew that she had come back for a reason, to let me know that she was still out there somewhere, and that she loved me just as much as I loved her. To this day, I still see that license plate message in my mind's eye, and I know that Harley is still watching over me, just like she always has. My dad has always had a fascination with animals, even when he was a young boy. When he was around 9 years old, he found a pet salamander by the lake and decided to bring it home. He named it Slimy and took care of it like it was his own child. One night, my dad's older sister had a dream that she ate Slimy. She woke up in a cold sweat, feeling sick to her stomach. She told my dad about the dream, and they both laughed it off, thinking it was just a strange coincidence. The next morning, they woke up to find Slimy was gone. They searched the entire house, but there was no sign of him. They searched outside, but he was nowhere to be found. It was like he had vanished into thin air. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, but there was no sign of Slimy. My dad was devastated, and he couldn't understand how his beloved pet had just disappeared like that. But my aunt was acting strange. She seemed distant, as if she was hiding something. Years went by, and my dad grew up, got married, and had children of his own. But he never forgot about Slimy and always wondered what had happened to him. It wasn't until my dad's aunt was on her deathbed that she finally revealed the truth. She told my dad that she had indeed eaten Slimy, but not in a dream. She had killed the salamander, cooked it, and eaten it for dinner one night. My dad was horrified, and he couldn't believe that his aunt would do such a thing. But what was even more terrifying was the fact that she claimed she had no memory of doing it. My dad couldn't stop thinking about it, and he started having nightmares about his aunt turning into some kind of monster that was devouring his childhood memories one by one. He became obsessed with the idea that his aunt had been possessed by some kind of malevolent spirit that had made her do unspeakable things. One day, my dad decided to visit his aunt in the hospital. She was in a coma, and the doctors didn't know how much longer she had left. As he sat by her bedside, he noticed a strange smell in the air, like something rotting. He looked around the room, but there was no source for the odor. Suddenly, my dad heard a faint whisper in his ear. It was his aunt's voice, but it was distorted and twisted, like it was coming from a different dimension. "I ate Slimy," the voice said. "But he tasted so good." My dad recoiled in horror and ran out of the room. He didn't know what to think, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever had possessed his aunt was still out there, waiting for its next victim. That night, my dad had a nightmare about Slimy, but it wasn't like any nightmare he had ever had before. He dreamed that he was trapped in a dark, endless void, and that Slimy was there with him, watching him with his tiny, unblinking eyes. As my dad reached out to touch the salamander, it opened its mouth and swallowed him whole. He felt himself being digested, dissolved into nothingness, and he knew that he would never escape the dream eater.